Sincere apologies that Julie and I cannot be with you today, but I welcome the opportunity of being able to speak to you about our very dear friend, Professor Tony Dickson, or as he was known by Chinese university leaders, Mr. Dr. Professor Dickson. Julie and I have known Tony and Jean for 26 years, and I worked closely with him, or sometimes against him, for 7 of those years. Tony was a clever man who knew how to operate. He graduated from Goldsmiths in London and then took a lecturing job at Glasgow Polytechnic in Paisley. Jean must have loved him because she went up there with him. In between long bouts of playing pool, golf and fishing, Tony gained his PhD, published and progressed through the ranks into a management role. In 1989, he moved to the then Newcastle Polytechnic to be Dean of Social Sciences. It emerged that some of the academics in the department were a troublesome crowd, reluctant to change and heavily unionised. But they met their match in Tony, whose ability and potential was identified, and he was swiftly promoted to the executive team on the top corridor as Deputy Vice-Chancellor Academic. At this time, he earned his title Professor. His can-do and will-do style continued to shine through, and his visibility around the university was appreciated. In those days, the top corridor staff did not wander far, but Tony was out and about, took his meals in the canteen, and was famed for buzzing around in the mornings with a bacon butty in his hand, his favourite morning snack all his life. Tony knew what he wanted and wanted to move at pace to deliver, but his key attribute was that he was a creator and innovator. He developed the university's international strategy. He was the brains behind the expansion of the city centre campus. He supported a new approach to sport provision at the university, which led to a host of successes in national university competitions and much, much more. A fine example of him as an operator occurred in 2002, when the university identified that it was not generating sufficient cash. I, with finance colleagues, was charged with the task of sorting out the management information and the cost base, and Tony headed off to China with senior colleagues from the business school. 6 months later, international student numbers had grown substantially and the cost base reduced. We had raised the ceiling and lowered the floorboards to give ourselves headroom for investment. In latter conversations, Tony and I reflected that his valued Labour Party were failing miserably to deliver a similar strategy. Most staff at Northumbria will remember Tony for his tireless work on international development, where he with colleagues put the university on the global map, including it teaching more students in Hong Kong on franchise programs than any other university. The international work sounds glamorous, but it was hard. But always Tony landed back at the office with a report and an action plan of what needed to be done next. The tedium of the long-haul trips was much improved when Tony finally persuaded me to change the travel policy to allow business class travel. Tony was a tough negotiator, and on a number of occasions he would phone me from abroad, trying to persuade me to do something that I was not keen on. And I had to use the age-old trick of telling him it was a bad line. I can't hear you. I'll have to call you back, giving me time to regroup. He, I am told, also inherited his mother's trait of not forgiving anyone who crossed his path. Luckily, I and many others were wise enough not to go there. Tony was a true professional and a genuine character. His intellect was second to none, and he was renowned for coming up with solutions to complex issues that others could not fathom. His solution on a page papers were legend. He was blessed with positive energy and an entrepreneurial spirit that allowed others to make mistakes and grow. Perhaps his most notable characteristic, though, both in and out of work, was his impatience. 40 minutes was his threshold for a meeting. After that, your time was up, and Tony was off on another track. I was amazed when I first joined the board meetings, when the clock ticked to 40 minutes, and Tony would get up, wander out, and then come back 5 minutes later with a fresh coffee. Cheeky so-and-so, I thought. But the board knew Tony, valued his contribution, and embraced this minor dalliance. On the golf course, Tony was just as impatient. Anyone who has played with Tony would tell you that he would tee off and that it appeared that his swing finished with his club back in the bag and Tony was off. The next players had to try and avoid him as he strode down the fairway 40 yards ahead. Tony told me that in his early career he played rugby, and I just knew that he must have been a scrum half because he had all the characteristics of a good scrum half. Always in the thick of things, very skillful, very determined, fearless, and not afraid to tell much bigger opponents what they should be doing. That was Tony. You will have gathered by now that I had the utmost respect for Tony, and I learned from him, and he was very supportive. We had our differences, but in the main I believe we worked seamlessly together to enhance the careers of staff, the experience of students, and the standing of the university. Tony was brilliant at building relationships outside of the university. He could hold his own in anyone's company and was never afraid to express his opinion to executives of major companies, senior politicians, chief constables, local authority leaders, and other big players in the sector. He was sought after for his advice both within and outside of the university. He was also a cheeky chappie, as evidenced by Northumbria posting an advertisement at Sunderland Metro Station when it opened, which broadcast that you're only 20 minutes ride away from the best university in the UK. He loved that. There came a point, though, when it was time for Tony to move on from Northumbria, and he did so in style by securing the prestigious role of president of Raffles University, Singapore. Jean and he loved Singapore, and why wouldn't they? The nearest watering hole for an after-work refreshment was the bar in Raffles Hotel, and Tony and Jean were semi-permanent residents. Julie and I were their first guests to visit them, and they made us so welcome, showing us everything. But then we realised we were being used as guinea pigs to find out which were the places to visit or to avoid, so that the raft of visitors who followed us would get a Rolls-Royce tour. Tony had a 4-year plan for the university, but true to form, he cracked it in 2. So they came back to Allendale, and Tony started his own successful higher education consultancy. He was never out of work, and he developed strategies for other universities based on his considerable wealth and experience. Like all successful professionals, Tony's work demanded long hours, but he still found time to enjoy himself outside of work. As you have heard from Joanna, he and Jean travelled extensively, and he was a devoted family man. He was also a devoted Manchester City fan and supported them through the tough times where their Manchester neighbours were winning everything ahead of them. So it was great that he got to see City come out of their shadow and emerge as real champions themselves. I need to add that Tony was not just generous in his giving of time to mentor people, but he was generous socially. If you ever were fortunate enough to be invited to Tony and Jean's for a dinner party at their super home in Allendale, you had to go. It was a not-to-be-missed event. Good company, great food, and lashings of quality wine. Taxis home were essential, including for Jean. I also witnessed his generosity on a famous occasion when the university men's rugby team had become university champions at Twickenham by beating the mighty Loughborough in the final. The second team had also won their own competition, and a few hours after the game, all the Northumbrian staff and students, some 60 to 100 in all, were gathered in a bar celebrating before the long coach ride home. I commented that the atmosphere was pretty special, and Tony quipped it was going to get better. He promptly went to the bar manager, flashed his corporate credit card, and declared a free bar for half an hour. The students could not believe it. And how many bottles of beer can you get in a blazer? So whilst it is ever so sad that Tony was taken from us far too early, there is so much to remember about him and to celebrate about his incredibly full and successful life. He was a good man who did great things. Tony, thank you.